Welcome to Mr. Beebop. Murder on the Orient Express is a work of detective fiction by English writer Agatha Christie, featuring the Belgian detective Hercule Poirot. It was first published in the United Kingdom by the Collins Crime Club on January 1, 1934. In the United States, it was published on February 28, 1934, under the title of Murder in the Calais Coach, by Dodd, Mead and Company. Here are some interesting facts and trivia about the novel.
Book dedication.
The dedication of the book reads: To MELM, Arpakia, 1933. MELM is Christie's second husband, archaeologist Max Edgar Lucien Malouin. She dedicated 4 books to him, either singly or jointly, the others being The Sittaford Mystery in 1931, Come Tell Me How You Live in 1946, and Christie's final written work, Postern of Fate in 1973. Christie and Malouin were married after a short engagement on September 11, 1930, followed by a honeymoon in Italy. After his final seasons working on Reginald Campbell Thompson's dig, Max raised the funds to lead an expedition of his own. With sponsorship from the trustees of the British Museum and the British School of Archaeology in Iraq, he set off in 1933 for a mound at Arpakia, northwest of Nineveh, where after several anxious weeks, considerable quantities of beautifully decorated pottery and figures came to the surface. A notable feature of this season is that for the first time, Christie, the rank amateur, assisted the professionals in their work. She was responsible for keeping written records and proved highly adept at cleaning and reassembling pottery fragments. As at Nineveh, she also found the time to continue writing Why Didn't They Ask Evans, and Unfinished Portrait being drafted at the dig. Despite this success, after 1933, Malouin discontinued work in Iraq due to the worsening political situation and moved on to Syria.
Literary reception.
The Times Literary Supplement of January 11, 1934, outlined the plot and concluded that the little gray cells solve once more the seemingly insoluble. Mrs. Christie makes an improbable tale very real, and keeps her readers enthralled and guessing to the end. In the New York Times Book Review of March 4, 1934, Isaac Anderson wrote, "The great Belgian detective's guesses are more than shrewd, they are positively miraculous." Although both the murder plot and the solution verge upon the impossible, Agatha Christie has contrived to make them appear quite convincing for the time being, and what more than that can a mystery addict desire? The reviewer in The Guardian of January 12, 1934, noted that the murder would have been perfect, that is, a perfect crime, had Poirot not been on the train and also overheard a conversation between Miss Debenham and Colonel Arbuthnot before he boarded. However, Poirot's little gray cells worked admirably, and the solution surprised their owner as much as it may well surprise the reader, for the secret is well kept and the manner of the telling is in Mrs. Christie's usual admirable manner. Robert Barnard said that this novel was the best of the railway stories. The Orient Express, snowed up in Yugoslavia, provides the ideal closed setup for a classic-style exercise in detection, as well as an excuse for an international cast list. Contains my favorite line in all Christie, "Poor creature, she's a Swede."
References and allusions.
The kidnapping and murder of Charles Lindbergh's son in 1932 inspired that element in Christie's novel 2 years later. The novel used many elements of the real-life case. A young child, firstborn of the family, was kidnapped for ransom directly from the crib. The parents were famous, the father was a well-known pilot and the mother pregnant. And the ransom was paid, but the child found dead soon after. An innocent but perhaps loose-lipped maid, employed by Lindbergh's parents, was suspected of involvement in the crime. After being harshly interrogated by police, she committed suicide. Two less notable events helped inspire her novel. Agatha Christie's first journey on the Orient Express in late 1928, and a blizzard near Çerkezköy, Turkey, that marooned the Orient Express for 6 days just a few months later, in February 1929. Flooding from rainfall that washed sections of track away in December 1931 halted Christie's return from her husband's archaeological dig at Nineveh aboard an Orient Express for 24 hours. Her authorized biography details that event in a complete quotation of a letter to her husband, which describes several passengers on her train who inspired both the plot and the characters in her novel, including an American, Mrs. Hilton, who inspired Mrs. Hubbard.
Synopsis.
Hercule Poirot is traveling when he is suddenly called back to London. Aboard the elegant train of the 1930s, the Orient Express, he travels back with a friend, a director of the Wagon Lit Company, to Calais. During the first night of the trip, the train is forced to stop due to a snowdrift that has partially obstructed the tracks. The next morning, the body of one of the passengers is found, the victim having suffered multiple uneven stab wounds. At the request of the company's director, Poirot launches an investigation into the man's death, and quickly discovers that there is no shortage of suspects among the travelers. The opening chapters of the novel take place primarily in Istanbul. The rest of the novel takes place in Yugoslavia, with the train trapped between Vinkovci and Brod.
Characters.
The investigators. Hercule Poirot, world-famous sleuth from Belgium. Monsieur Book, Poirot's friend and a director of the company Internationale de Wagons Lits. Dr. Stavros Constantine, a Greek physician. The victim. Samuel Edward Ratchet Cassetti, an unsavory-looking man with a dark secret. The suspects. Hector Willard McQueen, a tall, handsome, young American, the victim's secretary and translator. Edward Henry Masterman, the victim's British valet. Pierre-Paul Michel, the French conductor of the Calais Coach. Mary Hermione Debenham, a tall, dark, young British woman working as a governess in Baghdad. Colonel John Arbuthnot, a tall British Army officer returning from India. Princess Natalia Dragomirov, an imperious, elderly Russian noblewoman and grande dame. Fräulein Hildegard Schmidt, a middle-aged German woman, Princess Dragomirov's maid. Count Rudolf Andrenyi, a tall, dark Hungarian diplomat with English manner and clothing, traveling to France. Countess Helena Andrenyi, the Count's pale young wife. Greta Olsen, a middle-aged Swedish missionary returning home for a vacation, who cannot speak much English. Mrs. Caroline Martha Hubbard, Linda Arden, a stout, elderly, very excitable American, returning from a visit to her daughter who works in Smyrna, Turkey. Antonio Foscarelli, a swarthy and exuberant Italian-American businessman from Chicago. Cyrus Bethman Hardman, a private investigator from New York City.
Adaptations.
The book was made into a 1974 movie directed by Sidney Lumet and produced by John Brabourne and Richard B. Goodwin. The film starred Albert Finney as Poirot, Martin Balsam as Senior Bianchi, George Coulouris as Dr. Constantine, and Richard Widmark as Ratchet/Cassetti, with the remaining cast of suspects including Sean Connery as Arbuthnot, Lauren Bacall as Mrs. Hubbard, Anthony Perkins as McQueen, John Gielgud as Beddoes, Michael York as Count Andrenii, Jean-Pierre Cassel as Pierre Michel, Jacqueline Bisset as Countess Andrenii, Wendy Hiller as Princess Dragomirov, Vanessa Redgrave as Mary Debenham, Rachel Roberts as Hildegard Schmidt, Colin Blakely as Hardman, Dennis Quilley as Foscarelli, and Ingrid Bergman, who won the 1974 Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for her role as Greta Olsen. Only minor changes were made for the film. Masterman was renamed Beddoes, the dead maid was named Paulette instead of Suzanne, Helena Goldenberg became Helena Grunwald, which is German for Greenwood, Antonio Foscarelli became Gino Foscarelli, Caroline Martha Hubbard became Harriet Belinda Hubbard, and the train company's Belgian director, Monsieur Book, became instead an Italian director, Senior Bianchi. On June 16, 2015, 20th Century Fox hired Kenneth Branagh to direct and star as Poirot, in another film adaptation of the story, which was released on November 3, 2017. The cast included Johnny Depp as Ratchet, Michelle Pfeiffer as Mrs. Hubbard, Penelope Cruz as Pilar Estravados, a Spanish version of Greta Olsen, the name coming from a character in Hercule Poirot's Christmas, Judi Dench as Princess Dragomirov, Derek Jacobi as Masterman, Leslie Odom Jr. as Dr. Arbuthnot, Daisy Ridley as Mary Debenham, Lucy Boynton as Countess Andrenii, Tom Bateman as Monsieur Book, Manuel Garcia Rulfo as Beniamino Marquez, a Cuban version of Antonio Foscarelli, Josh Gad as Hector McQueen, Marwan Kenzari as Pierre Michel, Sergei Polyanin as Count Andrenii, Willem Dafoe as Cyrus Hardman, and Olivia Colman as Hildegard Schmidt. The character of Colonel Arbuthnot is combined with Dr. Constantine to create Dr. Arbuthnot, a sniper who served under Colonel Armstrong in the war, and had his medical school paid for by Armstrong. McQueen's father is portrayed as having been a prosecutor in the Armstrong case, rather than the Armstrong family's lawyer, and whose career was ruined after he prosecuted the maid Suzanne. And Monsieur Book is changed from the director of the company to the director's nephew. Added was a direct link for Poirot to the Armstrong kidnapping. Before Sonia's death, John Armstrong wrote to Poirot for help. Also, unlike the book, the kidnapping does not take place in Long Island but in New Jersey, where the Lindbergh kidnapping took place. Suzanne Michel is switched from Pierre Michel's daughter to his sister. Cyrus Hardman poses as an Austrian scientist named Gerhard Hardman for part of the film. The novel was first adapted as a 1955 episode of the West German television series, Die Galerie der Großen Detective. Haney Goebel played the role of Poirot. A thoroughly modernized and poorly received made-for-TV version, starring Alfred Molina as Poirot, was presented by CBS in 2001. This version co-starred Meredith Baxter as Mrs. Hubbard and Leslie Caron as Senora Alvarado, based on Princess Dragomirov, and portrayed as the widow of a South American dictator. Poirot is portrayed as significantly younger and less eccentric than Christie's detective, and is given a subplot involving a romantic relationship with Vera Rozikoff, who is loosely based on an infrequently recurring character of the same name. The story is updated to a contemporary setting, and 4 of the suspects, Hildegard Schmidt, Cyrus Hardman, Edward Masterman, and Greta Olsen, are deleted, as is Dr. Constantine. David Suchet reprised the role of Hercule Poirot in Murder on the Orient Express, a 90-minute movie-length episode of the television series, Agatha Christie's Poirot, co-produced by ITV Studios and WGBH-TV, adapted for the screen by Stuart Harcourt. The original air date in the United States was July 11, 2010, and it was aired on Christmas Day 2010 in the UK. The cast includes Dame Eileen Atkins as Princess Dragomirov, Hugh Bonneville as Masterman, Jessica Chastain as Mary Debenham, Barbara Hershey as Mrs. Hubbard, Toby Jones as Ratchet, and David Morrissey as Colonel Arbuthnot. The character Cyrus Hardman, the former American police officer turned private detective, has been largely amalgamated with the chauffeur Foscarelli. Inasmuch as regards being the lover of the dead maid, and Dr. Constantine, who in the novel is unrelated to the murders, is depicted as having been the Armstrong family's doctor in America. As in the 2017 film, McQueen's father was the prosecutor rather than the Armstrongs' lawyer, whose career was ruined after he was threatened into acquitting Cassetti. A Japanese adaptation was broadcast over 2 nights in January 2015 on Fuji Television, titled Orient Kyuku Satsujin Jiken, and it featured several famous actors, including Nanomiya Kazunari, Matsushima Nanako, Tamaki Hiroshi, Kichis Michiko, Nishida Toshiyuki, and Sawamura Eiki. The main character, Suguro Takaru, modeled on Hercule Poirot, was played by actor Nomura Mansai. The first night featured a storyline true to the original text, but set in Japan in 1933. In this version, the train Orient Kyuku ran from the western city of Shimonoseki to Tokyo, with the train stopped by a small avalanche near Sekigahara, Gifu. The second night was an original story. John Moffat starred as Poirot in a 5-part, BBC Radio 4 adaptation by Michael Bakewell, directed by Enid Williams, and originally broadcast from December 28, 1992 to January 1, 1993. Andre Marin appeared as Book, Joss Ackland as Ratchet/Cassetti, Sylvia Sims as Mrs. Hubbard, Sian Phillips as Princess Dragomirov, Francesca Annis as Mary Debenham, and Peter Polycarpou as Dr. Constantine. In 2017, the streaming service Audible released another radio adaptation that featured Tom Conti as the voice of Poirot. The voice cast also featured Sophie Okonedo as Mary Debenham, Eddie Marsan as Ratchet/Cassetti, and narration from Art Malik. American playwright Ken Ludwig adapted the novel into a play, which premiered at the McCarter Theater in Princeton, New Jersey, on March 14, 2017. The production was directed by Emily Mann, and starred Alan Cordner in the role of Hercule Poirot. A board game based on the novel, named Orient Express, was released in 1985. The point-and-click computer game, Agatha Christie, Murder on the Orient Express, was released in November 2006 for Windows, and expanded on Agatha Christie's original story, with a new playable central character as Hercule Poirot, voiced by David Suchet, is ill and recovering in his train compartment. A new game, Agatha Christie, Murder on the Orient Express, a revisited and modernized version of Agatha Christie's classic, set in 2023, is set to be released in October 2023 on PC and PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo Switch consoles. Murder on the Orient Express was released by HarperCollins as a graphic novel adaptation on July 16, 2007, adapted by François Rivière and illustrated by Solitaire, Jean-François Miniac. This was translated from the edition first published in France by Emmanuel Proust Editions in 2003, under the title of Le Crime de l'Orient Express. In 2017, Swiss publisher Editions Paquette released a French graphic novel adaptation of the story, entitled Hercule Poirot, Le Crime de l'Orient Express.
Did you know?
The U.S. title of Murder in the Calais Coach was used to avoid confusion with the 1932 Graham Greene novel Stamboul Train, which had been published in the United States as Orient Express. Thank you for watching. See you again next time.